Good evening, everybody, or good morning if you're watching this in the morning. As promised, today I want to talk a little bit more about the worksheet for monitoring. So we have two worksheets, as you'll recall. We have the monitoring plan and we have the evaluation plan. And today we're going to talk about the monitoring plan. Now, you can customize a lot of the columns for this, and today we're going to talk about a specific project and how I'm going to fill out the monitoring plan for that project. It should give you a good template to follow to adapt the monitoring plan to your specific project. You might not need to adapt it at all, so then it will also give you a good example to work from. So either way, this should give you the information that you need to complete the monitoring plan. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. So you might remember that for the monitoring plan, you start by putting down the project outcome indicators. These are the outcomes that you are hoping to get from the project. Then you put down the baseline values and the target values at critical milestone times during the project. And then you specify how often you're going to collect the data to make sure that you are hitting your project outcomes, what you're going to use to make sure that you're hitting the project outcomes. So in other words, what data collection instruments you're going to use and who is responsible for data collection. So let's take a look at a project. Let's say we are rebuilding a website. In fact, I can show you an example website that my company and I are working on. This is the website for the Brandeis Innovation Center, their answer to Accelerate. And one of the things that we worked on recently is this set of innovation resources, which we built so that anybody who's looking to do a startup or do any innovation within the Brandeis University community has a portal to go to where they can get the information they need. There were a lot of moving pieces to this project, and it required a fair amount of monitoring and evaluation. Whether you are redoing a kitchen or you're building a new building from scratch, or you're involved in an IT or technical project or a home project, you can always figure out what the project outcome indicators are. In this case, we had several. One is that it would be easy to navigate. One is that it would meet the needs of all the stakeholders, the students, the faculty, and the staff. And of course, the standard outcome indicators that you see in pretty much every project would apply, such as on time, on budget, and to spec. Now, you could argue that all of the information that's not on time, on budget, and to spec is the specs, and that is a valid argument. So you might simply want to eliminate to spec in that case and put the specs in here, such as easy to navigate in this case, or meets the needs of the stakeholders. So here we can put our baseline values. If you're doing earned value management, you're going to put our baseline value here. Our baseline value obviously for all of these is going to be 0. There is no website. But you could also, for on time and on budget, you can put the baseline value of what your baseline budget is or your baseline timeline is. So let's say our baseline value here is 6 months deadline. Baseline budget, that's confidential, but I could put the budget in there. And let's make up a budget. A typical budget for a website would be about, let's say, $5,000. So you can see here, this was not a project that took multiple years. So if you take your baseline value being that you're going to do this project in 6 months, here you can break it down into other time frames. So let's get rid of year 1, year 2, and year 3 because this was not a multi-year project. And instead we can put whatever timeline intervals make sense to you. Let's say target value month 1, month 3, and then month 6. So you can see here, because this was a fairly small project with target value for easy to navigate, you really wouldn't have the layout until month 6. So the target value here would be meets spec. And this is not a quantifiable value, this is a qualitative value. It either is or it isn't easy to navigate. Now, on the other hand, meets the needs of the stakeholders. We had multiple stakeholders, as you can see in this website. We had to build a section for students, a section for prospective students, faculty and staff, alumni, and companies. So you can see here, we had 6 sections that needed to be built. So I can break this down in terms of, in month 1, we wanted to build sections for 2 stakeholders. By month 3, we wanted to have 6 stakeholders roughed in, but not completed. And here we would want to have all 6 complete. Now, in terms of the target values for on time and on budget, you can use earned value calculations here. And you could say that you wanted at this particular time in month 1, you wanted to have perhaps $2,000 spent, $2,000 in earned value, $4,000 in month 3, and $5,000 in month 6, and then you could put in earned value management. Then in terms of on budget, you would be putting in here the same thing, because you're using earned value as the measure of whether you're both on time and on budget, and that's the beauty of earned value. You could also put all of this information in here if on time is not one of your project outcome indicators, but I would say it typically is going to be, in which case you would be putting your earned value management simply in here. You can handle it in one of a multitude of different ways, but I found that this is an easy way. You can then put your baseline value here if you're using earned value to 0, and then here you can put on time 6-month project. But if you're not using earned value management, but some other way of measuring progress towards the goal, you would put something there here like 50% done, 70% done, and 100% done. You can measure this in multiple different ways, and that's part of what you're supposed to decide as you work on your final project of how are you going to measure things. You're going to put it here, for instance, data collection frequency and data collection instruments. I've decided that I'm going to measure my progress towards being on time and on budget using earned value. So I put data collection instrument being both earned value. That's also what I'm using for data analysis. And in terms of data collection, we were the agency of record, so I knew how much earned value we had at each month. If I were not the person both doing the project and the project manager, I would use some mechanism for collecting that data, because I wouldn't have the information right at my fingertips. You could say here that you're going to be using phone calls, for instance, to determine whether people are on budget, or you should be using project management software like Asana or Trello. Whatever you're using, you would put the information here as to how you are gathering your data. If you have the data yourself, you can simply put how you are measuring, what metrics you're going to use, like earned value. Now, in terms of data collection, frequency, and reports, again, I'm really just using earned value, and I can say here that I am doing it bi-weekly. Every 2 weeks, I'm looking at where our progress is. You don't necessarily need to collect data at the exact same times as you should be hitting your target values. In fact, realistically, you should be collecting data much more often than the number of columns you have for target values. You shouldn't be monitoring only when you have to have a touch point where you determine whether the project is on time and on budget. You should be doing it all of the time. And then I'm putting here who is responsible for the data collection, and I'm just going to put myself, because I'm responsible for the data collection. If it were somebody else in my organization, like for instance, one of my project managers, I could put in Bob is responsible, or whoever is responsible for the data collection. But in my case, it's myself. Multiple people can also be responsible, however, for the data collection. So for instance, we partnered with somebody within one of the departments named Ian, so I'm going to put Ian as the secondary person responsible for the data collection. So what you're going to do here is you're going to list as many project outcome indicators as you can. It can be basic things like whether it's on time or on budget, but you also want to come up with things that are specific to the project. You don't want to simply say, well, it's enough that it's on time and it's on budget, and that's the whole thing I'm going to monitor and evaluate. You want to make sure that you're monitoring that things are up to code. You want to monitor quality standards. You want to make sure that as many project outcome indicators that mean that the project is going to be a success are measured here. You're then going to put the baseline values, which in many cases are going to be 0. And then you're going to map out the target values on a timeline when it makes sense to have 3 major touch points to make sure that you're hitting your target values. In one point, you would probably, in one of these rows, be measuring using earned value, but it's up to you what you're going to use to measure the progress towards the project outcome indicators. You can use earned value calculations, you can use percentage done, percentage complete, and for a lot of your project outcome indicators, the measurements are going to be qualitative. In other words, it's not something you can put a number to. It's going to be something binary. In other words, is it up to code? Did it pass inspection or did it not pass inspection? So in those cases, oftentimes your baseline value is always going to be 0 because it's not something that's going to even exist at the beginning of the project, and then your target values might only be something that you can populate here in the final month because it's something that is, again, a qualitative measure, something either is or isn't up to code, is or isn't satisfactory for the client's needs and things like that. However, if you can break something down into milestones so you can see that you're making progress towards those qualitative goals. For instance, client signs off on the wallpaper. Client signs off on the lighting fixtures. If you can put those things in as target values, even though it's qualitative, you're still measuring and monitoring progress towards the goal. Then you want to specify how frequently you're going to collect the data. And remember, you don't want to collect the data only when you have one of these touch points. You want to collect the data as often as is necessary for you as the project manager to make sure that the project is on track. And that's often going to be weekly, even if it's a very small project on a small scale, an intimate team where everybody knows everybody else. You still have to do formal monitoring and evaluation bi-weekly. And if you are going on a bi-weekly schedule, the assumption is going to be that the only reason you're measuring so infrequently is because you have close monitoring daily on an informal level with the team. In other words, you're all in the same place and you can check in on them several times a day. Otherwise, you really want to monitor much more frequently, even than every other week. Then your data collection instruments are going to be how you are going to find out whether things are going okay. It's perfectly all right to say walking around and talking to people is my data collection instrument. If you're going to use something more formal, like working with multiple people in Microsoft Project, Asana, or Trello, some project management monitoring and evaluation tool, you can use that and specify that that is your data collection instrument. And then finally, responsible parties for data collection should be the easiest thing to put down. You put down everybody who's responsible for data collection. If different people are responsible for different parts of the data collection, for instance, one person makes a verbal report to somebody else who puts the information into Asana, which is a project monitoring and project management tool, then you're going to specify the different roles each job has. If it's a little bit more loosely structured than that, then just give the names of everybody who is responsible for project monitoring and data collection for that particular project outcome indicator, not for the project overall, but who is the person with boots on the ground who's got the information about that particular project outcome and whether you are on time and on budget with it and up to spec and up to code. So this is what you're going to be putting together for your monitoring worksheet.